So, it is the granddaddy of role-playing games that was sort of developed, I think, about 40 years ago by a guy. In which you play the role of a heroic warrior or a wizard. And it's a collaborative storytelling game. So it's not that you're playing against the world so much as that you're making a story together. And imagine for a few hours to be someone else. And it had a really big influence on computer gaming in general. From the first sort of role-playing games, maybe you've heard of Ultima or Legend of Zelda, all those role-playing games online or on consoles, they sort of came from Dungeons and Dragons. And lately, it's had a bit of a comeback. So if you follow on Netflix, there's Stranger Things, in which some of the protagonists in this series are sitting around the table playing this role-playing game. And there is really something unique about making a fantasy story together or role-playing something together in a way that is not mediated by computer software, right? In a computer game, you're sort of limited to what the developers thought of that you can do. And whereas with Dungeons and Dragons, you're only limited by your imagination. So, a little bit about myself. I like role-playing games a lot. That was me in my younger years. I used to LARP as well. It's pretty popular in Germany. And I also played tabletop games. I've played Dungeons and Dragons, DM'd for like 20 years ago, and lately I have some friends again to play. And also, I have 2 boys, 10 and 12, and when they were much younger, actually, when they were like 6 years old, we started role-playing as well. And this is the game that we played. It's called Fuzzy Heroes, in which you use your stuffy and whatever, it can be a dragon or a cow or something. And it makes it a lot easier for younger kids to understand how to play a role-playing game without having to understand a lot of the more difficult rules that are in Dungeons and Dragons. So in my job at Tucows, how this came up was, well, we were working on improving our response to incidents. And there's really sort of 3 components that you can see. So there's a technology component that is sold by many people that are here today. Your monitoring systems or your redundancy systems, the technology bits. And then there's process. There is who do we call when something breaks, or who do we need to escalate to, or how do we prioritize the work. On the people side is really where it comes together. Like, how do you train people actually to combine the bits of technology and the bits of process that you have to, under stress, make the right decisions, right? How do you do that? And it is pretty well known that role-playing is a pretty good way to do that. There's lots of studies that say role-playing really works. If you put people in a role-playing scenario, then they can practice and they can make their mistakes in that way, sort of not impacting real-world situations. And through that practice, they learn. However, sort of everybody hates role-playing. Like, there's very few organizations that I know where they really do fire drills in the right way, or where they do role-playing and have people that are really enthusiastic about role-playing the way I'm enthusiastic about role-playing. So the question came up last year when I was talking to a fellow engineer. Why is this thing that we think is so awesome, that we do in our free time, that we really enjoy doing and spend like tons of time thinking about scenarios and role-playing. Why is that so much fun, and why does it kind of suck in the company? Because why is it not fun? And from that came the question, can we sort of take Dungeons and Dragons and then make it into a role-playing game for instant handling, right? So can we just take, for example, this is a character sheet in Dungeons and Dragons, and it has this guy, the character name is Raif Remora, and he's a rogue, level 3, he's a human. And you can see that he has 13 strength. He's pretty like average, above average strength, but he's super dexterous, so he can probably sneak around a lot and stab people in the back. That's what rogues do. High constitution, so difficult to poison. He's a bit of an overpowered character, actually. And then intelligence, sort of average intelligence, and pretty high wisdom. So can we take this and then sort of translate that into business things? Like, can we just take, I don't know, an accountant and say, okay, strength 6 because they don't go to the gym very often, but high intelligence, and then we give them some skills like investigation or history, arcana, and some immunities against being charmed or confused or exhausted. And then so wield QuickBooks and is this a way how we can do that? And does that map well? And the answer is not really, actually. It's actually a pretty terrible idea. We tried it, and there are a bunch of reasons, but 3 of the main ones are, well, Dungeons & Dragons takes a long time to prepare for the game. The people who play Dungeons & Dragons spend a lot of time doing it. The sessions take a long time, so a Dungeons & Dragons campaign can take a year or 2 years or 5 years, which is not really what, a good match. And then it's also very complex. There's lots of finicky rules around stabbing people in the back, and if you can succeed, and if you can try to sneak past the troll over the bridge. So that really changed it a little bit into, can we then at least take inspiration from tabletop role-playing games like D&D and come up with a system that is inspired by this, but not a sort of an immediate copy. And that is what I want to talk about, is sort of this concept game that we developed and that we're developing, and we're starting to play it in the company now. It's not finished, but I really hope that people who are inspired by this maybe have some suggestions for us, and we can play it actually in the lounge. I brought a draft copy. So, we called it Disasters and Downtime, and we're trying to make it a game that is more suited. So we're trying to shorten the game, for example. It should be like a 10-minute game that you can sort of pick up and immediately play. We wanted to make sure that, and sort of we wanted to make it so that you could play in a way that you don't have to understand a lot of the complex rules that you would need to know in Dungeons & Dragons. And the way to do that is actually to go back to the example that I gave, the game that I played with my kids. With Fuzzy Heroes, obviously when you play with a 6-year-old, you can't really explain very complicated rules, and they have very short attention span, like engineers. So that was actually a really good model, right? And so how that works is there is something called a dungeon master or a games master, and the games master runs the game and does the narrative, sort of the main storyteller, if you will. It plays the world. And so there might be a lot of complicated math going on that's done by the dungeon master that doesn't really make it into the story. That's not how the players don't have to worry about it, if you will. So in Disasters and Downtime, players take on roles as managers. You can be an operations manager, an engineering manager, customer service, and there's a bunch of others, but it's not really that defined. And as I said, there's a games master. It's the main storyteller, game facilitator, creates details and challenges that the players have to overcome, and is also the arbiter of rules, right? So you can say as a player, I'm going to jump off the roof of this building from the 3rd floor, and I'm landing on my feet. And then the dungeon master might say, well, you think that you can jump off the roof and land on your feet, but what actually happens is something that's not so good, because you can't fly. So these managers or these players, what they're trying to do is restore service before customer goodwill runs out. So we established that at the beginning of the game, there's a service that becomes unavailable, there's some problem with it, and customers get upset. And we're really trying to tailor it to the actual company that you're playing it. So the games master will need to do some preparation. So if you're a web hosting company, the game will be about web hosting. If you're an email provider, the game will be about email, right? So it's not far away. And we will need people to use some cards to make it simpler for them. And I think I brought one. I don't think you can see it. This is called a D20. That's a 20-sided die. This and a bunch of cards is all you need to play Disasters in Downtime. So there's a bunch of different card types. I'm not going to go over all of them, but so these are the main types. And I just want to give you a flavor of what the game feels like, of what sort of things there are. So there's service cards, like email service, DNS, web hosting. There are symptom cards, something that can be wrong with your system. Those two are open, so they're drawn randomly at the beginning of the game. Then there's team cards. Those are the teams that you can engage to either communicate with your customers or try to identify what the problem is, like troubleshoot it or fix the problem. And there's contributing factor cards, and those are the things that the underlying problems that cause the symptoms. Is that sort of clear? I assume that I have sort of a technical audience. So. And then there's tools and attributes that can help or hinder you. So this is the first one. From just two example cards for services is, well, domain registration, picked one. And just like Magic the Gathering, we have like little flavor texts at the bottom, like quotes. I don't know if that's actually readable. No, it is reasonably readable. And DNS. So these are picked at the beginning. You pick one at the beginning of the game. And then you pick a symptom. Now, one symptom might be some customers can't log in. So you could combine the two and say, well, our domain registration platform is slow, or some customers cannot log in. These are the team cards. So there's a security team, a team of developers, and there's customer support. And each of those has certain special abilities that will help them troubleshoot certain things or implement fixes. So the two main things are investigate, to identify what's wrong, or to fix, try to make a fix. So the security team has bonuses to implement fixes that have to do with security. But not all of it is sort of captured in sort of these hard numbers. Because, for example, customer support, how well they do, what bonuses they get depends on how well they roleplay. So this is a really important part of what the games master will do. Now, contributing factors. This is where it becomes interesting. The games master picks 3 contributing factors. Because, you know, if you have a real incident, it's actually never simple. It's never one thing. It's not the server failed. No, it's like the server failed, and we thought we had a backup, but it didn't properly fail over, or something like that. So there's 3 contributing factors, and the players don't know what these are. So they are picked at random. And the first thing that they need to do is do investigations to figure out what the problems are. And so these are sort of randomly picked. The games master comes up with a narrative to combine them, right? So might say, well, there was a bad release. It messed some of the NTP settings up, and this caused NTP issues. And because of the NTP issues, some of the coordination inside my microservices all of a sudden got into race conditions that that was previously not the case. And this is causing some customers to not log into the their domain platform. So I just picked some random cards, and now I have sort of a cohesive story that's different every time. There are some attributes and tools that can help you with this. Reputation is one. If you have a terrible reputation, then you get less goodwill. And if your goodwill hits 0, then the game ends. You can have network graphs. Well, everybody has a degree of network graphs. So if you don't have them at all, then you get a negative, you get a penalty. So one of the things that the games master need to do at the beginning of the game is to, and can do that openly, and go like, so folks, how do we have network graphs, and how good are they? And sort of, so it's also, even in the setup, a very good exercise for the team to sort of be aware of what the shape of their infrastructure and the state of the quality of their documentation is, for example. Having no documentation, not good, right? So the goodwill starts at 10 points, and the game ends when it runs out, or if you have resolved the issue, obviously. The rounds represent time spent managing the outage. Often it is the case that in the beginning of an outage, there's lots of activity, and then if an outage sort of continues, it becomes a little bit more chunky because people need time to implement fixes or to do investigation. So that's why the first 4 rounds are 15 minutes, represent 15 minutes in the in-game time. The next 2 are 30 minutes, and then every round after that is 60 minutes. The games master has a lot of sort of leeway in manipulating time in the game, too. And just to really quickly give you an example for how an investigation would work. So you would roll a certain number to figure out what the games master is inviting them to figure out what this race condition, if they can figure out that there is a race condition as part of the problem. The players roll, they add 3 because the developers are doing the investigation and they can investigate code, they have a +3 bonus. Unfortunately, they have no documentation, so they get a -1. And that sum needs to be larger or equal to 15 to succeed. And when they succeed, then they can start fixing the problem. Must be hopefully familiar to people who have played Dungeons and Dragons. This is, I want to leave that behind a little bit because there's a lot more to say, but I just wanted to show a little bit. The game development, we're looking for feedback and testers and contributors. The plan is to release the cards and the rulebook in April for free, so you can play the game in your organization. And if you're interested, please drop by the Tucows Lounge at CloudFest. Thanks to Shaw and Susanna and Alex for helping playtest the game and making suggestions. We are going to give away this game for free, obviously, releasing it as shareware. You can download it from this. There's this really handy site that you can use to download things from. This is an old version of the Tucows site, by the way. So we're hoping to release this thing in April. Yeah, I hope that this sort of helps people think about role-playing in their organization and what it can, that might be a fun way to do it. Right? That's all I got. Thank you.